So morning, everyone. I haven't had the greatest of starts today, so got kicked off with coming down at dawn to be told by a 7-year-old, "Why are you looking so smart?" Then got caught in a traffic jam, which then, due to an accident, so held me up further. And then finally found out that trains have to stop if there is a swan on the line, which apparently the train driver also said was the first time he'd had that experience. So apologies that I was meant to be on slightly earlier and got slightly delayed, but hopefully the positive start to the day starts now. So I'm going to move on to talking about digital transformation, and just firstly a kind of show of hands on who in the room has been involved in some aspect of digital procurement transformation. I guess we've got a fairly large percentage, so probably my guess is around 100-ish people. Find a clicker. So as a result, I think many of you will have then, looking at those programs, have looked at the positivity and how we're going to be successful and how do we make sure we deliver 100% of what we've committed to. The reality is that the stats, and it depends on which consultancy you listen to and which report you listen to, but between 70 and 95% of digital transformations fail. So the reality is, in this room, 5 people have been successful based on what we just talked about. And I was kind of thinking about it, of really, in any other part of your life, would you even bother? And in particular, if, given the scarce resources, if you had £1 million of your own money, and I was going to tell you you've got a 5% chance of success, is that where you would be investing your money? So, interested really to look into some of the background behind that, based on some of the analysis and studies that have happened, based on my own experiences. And obviously you've got the elephant in the room, that we all digital transformation, but a grand total of 5 of us in this room will have been fully successful in delivering great transformations. So, taking it back to its sort of grassroots, wanted to look at really, well, what is digital transformation? I think we use the terminology, particularly digital, in many, many different forms today, in many different aspects. It means very different things if you are an SME compared to a huge multinational. What that digital transformation can look like can be very different. But ultimately, I guess fundamentally, looking at the dictionary definitions, it's really that a complete change in the appearance or character, and particularly so that something is improved. I think that's the critical element, supported by use of computer technology. So using that, and using that logic that we talked about on the fact that only 5 of us in the room have been successful, and particularly given most of our roles, the easy thing is clearly, let's blame the supplier. Because actually, and there's obviously a number of tech suppliers who I know in the room who I've just been talking to, clearly you're just not giving us the technology that we're looking for. But the reality is, and those who have been doing this for longer than we wish to admit, we're in the best place that we've ever been in terms of what that landscape looks like. So I wasn't quite around in the 70s, 80s period, but certainly the 90s onward. And I think really, particularly the last 10 years, I would say, there's been some very disruptive elements that have come into the industry, which have driven real progress. So I think some of those disruptors that have come in have driven the longer term providers to really look at their offering, look at the solutions and how they can drive that forward. So from that perspective, it should be easy, and we should all be doing full, perfect digital transformations. However, I'm guessing that all those people who put their hands in the air have felt like this at some time. I can think of many programs, and what I'll do is, as well as the theoretical, I'll try and overlay some of the work that we've been doing at Santander and how that fits together with this. And clearly being totally open and honest. Have we got everything right first time? Absolutely not. And so how we're learning from some of those activities. So the first one for me when looking at the research and also looking at my own experiences is relevancy. To me, this is a really important one because if things go well, that's great, perfect. If we do fail, but we understand why we fail, and we get huge amounts of feedback, again, we can learn from that. Being irrelevant is probably the worst case scenario for me because people just don't care. They don't care enough about what it is we're delivering. They don't care enough about what the solution's like. And I think the relevancy piece is really how do we link it and align it to business outcomes. I think too often, and again, I'll give some examples where there's often not a solid enough business case. So I think many in the room who have looked at certainly source-to-pay platforms have probably gone through efficiency and effectiveness curves and talked about how we're going to reduce rogue spend, whoever these rogues are that we keep talking about, and we've talked about what the cost of a PO looks like. But the reality is there's no real clarity in terms of real world about what that's going to achieve. So it's really critical that we look at what success looks like, and importantly, what does failure look like as well. A lot of the reasons why I think that happens is that we start with the technology. So again, we've just looked at the chart a second ago that shows how the evolution of the procurement technologies has moved on over the last 30 years. And there can be the shiny toy syndrome where we look at the tech and then start figuring out how we can use it in our business. And it might be a very, very cool solution, but unless we've got a real use case or business problem, it's very difficult to embed that within the organization. And I think that's particularly the case with tools where you need a lot of configuration. So again, giving an example from my own life currently, I'm actually here this morning, but then this afternoon, we have a workshop with tech provider plus a number of my team, and that was very much focused on the use cases because there are processes that we've introduced and introducing, but I think the use cases are not really hard enough hitting in terms of really solving true critical business problems. So we're trying to bring my team back to sort of reevaluate actually how do we make a real difference so that coming back to the previous point, you're massively relevant within the organization. And I think also bringing that into the sales process, as procurement teams, we should be driving the business to really look at not what the tech can do in other organizations, or we've all sat in the demonstrations where a very good solutions consultant moves the mouse very, very quickly and shows you everything that the tech can offer, but it's really about, but what can it actually offer within our business, given what those use cases are. The next one is about, and it kind of leads on from that, and also my example in terms of some of the conversations I've got this afternoon about thinking big. So again, my team are coming up with specific examples, but to me, they're not going to change the world, and they're not going to, because of that, they're not going to have a big enough impact. So this is an area where I personally probably don't suffer. So I think my team would probably think I think too big, and actually how do you get a balancing act between trying to take on the world and actually delivering something. And so I think a key thing here really is making sure you're solving problems within the organization that are big enough to get that attention without trying to solve every problem your business has. And really the critical element behind that, and again, linked to the conversation I'm having this afternoon, is you only get one chance to make a first impression, and recovering from that is extremely, extremely difficult. Once somebody has a poor impression of a solution, for whatever reason, coming back from it is very challenging. The next one comes back to storytelling, and I think it's probably been talked about a lot. If you look at what skills do we look for in great procurement people these days, I think curiosity generally comes into it, problem solving comes into it, but being able to tell the story, we need to bring people with us. So humans, by default, fear what they don't understand. And obviously, when you're moving into technology solutions, there will be a start point where people don't really understand what it means. Coupled with that, you've obviously got people who have fears that they are going to be replaced by whatever those tech solutions are. So you will get deliberate sabotage within that, where people will deliberately try and switch off, try and switch other people off to those tools. But when I started that, we talked about humans, and I think too often we look at people within our business and think of them either as colleagues or resources as opposed to human beings, and actually what drives you from a human perspective. So there needs to be that constant, and it's not just this is why we're doing something, it's a constant reinforcement, it's a constant education process. It's all the way through into training. Again, I'm sure many of us in the room have talked about the fact that this tool is so intuitive that I don't need to train anyone. And the reality is it's never the case. We can all think of people we've dealt with previously who just didn't get it, and it's actually how do we then continue to take them on that journey. Another critical thing I think on the storytelling is making sure it's accurate as well. And yes, go back to my previous slide and think big, but telling people that you are going to give them an Amazon-like experience is not going to help you in post-implementation, because the reality is you're not. There are many things that we bring in, and we try and remove some of the controls, and we try and remove some of the workflows and approvals and cost center challenges, but the reality is Amazon are very good at what they do for a specific reason, and you are not going to replicate that in a corporate world, certainly. And if anybody has got a way that they have done that, then please speak to me at the end, because it is a very challenging environment. So I think selling the story, thinking big on it, but also being very realistic in terms of what that actually looks like. So taking that forward, you've obviously also got to build a business case that your execs understand. I think both from a procurement perspective and from a technology perspective, we can get into the procurement jargon, we can get into the tech jargon without really trying to think about what it is that our execs are interested in, because I will guarantee you they are not interested in the cost of a PO, they're not interested in some of the other efficiency and effectiveness slides that we will pull together. So it's how to bring that back into the exec language, and importantly, then be able to demonstrate how we have delivered against that, and say how that continues to deliver. And also a key element in this is also the cost of making sure they understand the cost of not making decisions. I think, again, in many of our businesses, coming back to that slide earlier, we will have had experiences where it is like walking through mud in terms of actually how do we get through internal governance, how do we get through internal processes. Generally, that ends up costing us more in the long term, and so trying to look at what is the cost of not doing something also is a critical element. So then, if we look at it from a landscape perspective, again, most of us who are operating in fairly significant size organizations do not have come in, put one technology in, and that's the rest of the world that we're operating in. We have a very complex landscape of different business processes, different procurement processes, different cloud solutions, plus on-premise solutions. And it's really important to define the processes and really look at getting the right data into the right places and think about the bigger picture. If you just put some very good tech over bad processes and poorly thought out data, you will still end up with a bad process and bad data at the end of it. So taking that step back and looking at the whole landscape and how this all fits together. And again, this is part of the session I was having this afternoon, where we have a number of different pieces of technology which could be capturing certain data, and actually what's that source of truth? How does it all feed together? How do we make it feel as seamless as possible? When you look at a slide later that I'll show, within our own organization, we haven't gone for a single provider for all the different solutions. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's a fully best-of-breed approach, but we do have a core foundation, and then we're bolting certain activities onto that, but we still need it to feel like one seamless experience from a user perspective. And that takes a lot of thought, and it's a lot of complexity involved in that. I'm a big fan of the thought of you are what you eat. I think, again, I think when I spoke here in April, I kind of talked similarly on this about risk, but really looking at how we're formulating teams, how we're bringing people together, and what our operating model looks like. And so pretty much everything I've said so far in all of the slides has been about process, it's been about people, pretty much zero has been about tech. But what we tend to do is that when we start building up a team delivery structure, it becomes quite technology focused in many organizations. And actually, probably the reality is where they'll focus 80% on the tech and 20% on the people. The reality is it should be 80% on the people and 20% on the tech, because as we'll go on to, we haven't actually criticized any of the tech solutions at this moment. It's about how do we then integrate them in the business. And building on that, how do you then create a multifunctional, empowered team with, coming back to the point earlier, clear goals, so actually what it is they are going to deliver, how you are going to measure success. I'm pretty sure, and I've definitely done this, but I'm pretty sure a lot of people in the room have, where you offer somebody a growth opportunity to take on more work off the side of their desk and to get involved in transformation programs. The reality is, unless you create the time, the headspace in order for them to do that, we're pretty much setting up someone up to fail, and setting someone up to fail is not a growth opportunity. If anything, it's a hugely demoralizing impact that can massively hit people's confidence. So it's really about how do we get the right type of people, and I'm also not a massive believer in just using internal resources. I think it's how you need to have the business knowledge, but you need to augment that with people who really understand the digital landscape as well, and who can start to bring knowledge of your chosen technology or technologies into your organization. And as much as anything, I think two reasons for that. One, it's to question whether it's your provider or if you're using an integrator, but to actually start to question, is it the best solution for you? Because what they will give you is, this is what the tool can do. What they won't necessarily give you is, this is the best solution given what your organization. So having that knowledge within your business is quite powerful. And again, a good example is on one of our source to pay implementations. I've got somebody who used to work for that company. They're actually leaving me this week, and it's creating a big hole within our team, because we're then becoming much more reliant on both the provider plus the integrator, and it is definitely creating challenges. Thankfully, we're just about to go live, so from that perspective, it's coming at a good time, but I would have happily kept that person for a bit longer. And then I think the second piece is really around the use cases. So it's really, again, when you're going through that sales process, how do we then make sure that this is the right tool, the right solution for our organization, as opposed to some generic financial services organization or different procurement organization. So just building on that, I think understanding, and again, I'll probably refer to myself on this because I'm probably one of the worst at this. I think understanding your tech and really getting into the detail around the opportunities, but also the limitation. I personally have probably a negative trait from my team's perspective, is that I will massively oversimplify things. So I will sit there and say, but I just want to do this, and the tool can do it, can't it? Without thinking about how does that all fit together, taking my slide earlier about what are the other data points, how's that going to feed into other systems. So I think really understanding your tech, understanding the product. And then obviously, as I talked about, being able to build up your own internal capabilities with the right people, with the right mindset, is a massive step forward. And then given the ratio we just talked about earlier, we won't get everything right. As we talked about, if the ratios are correct, 5% of us are going to actually succeed first time and deliver what we originally set out to do. So I think the key thing here really is just deal with it and move on quickly. I think we can get too hung up in why things are not working, why did that problem happen, go through lessons learned session. The fact is, it's about how do you evolve the solution. And again, one of the solutions that I'll go on to that we've delivered, I wouldn't say it necessarily has failed, it has delivered a solution that we were looking for, but it hasn't delivered the full picture and the full story. So we're already on to the second wave, and I guess to put that into context, I've only been at Santander now 21 months. So we've been through one round of iteration, we've implemented, we've now got the second round in terms of how do we solve some of those issues, how do we then ensure that we've got more business engagement into the solution, and then really give the outcome that we were looking for first time. But it hasn't been I wouldn't say it's been a hugely negative experience. I mean, it's been very much about how do we just move on, because it is serving a purpose, it's just not serving the full purpose of what we're looking for. And then the final one, before I go on to just some of the pieces we've been looking at Santander, is really about, I've said support model here, but I think it's more about the whole operating model. I think people, again, you can focus on the technology, you can focus on the use cases. Invariably, what you have at the end of this is new processes, new tech, and new people. And all of that needs to be managed, and you need to be thinking as much on your whole operating model. Who are the fingers actually touching the keys, and how does that all fit together? Because if you are going back to the definitions earlier, significant change, it will change roles and responsibilities within your organization, whether that's through consultations, whether that's through union-type conversations, or it's simply a matter of evolution of your current teams. The operating model will change, and really thinking about the implications of that and how are we going to do new tasks that never happened in the future. Because again, coming back to the success rate, I'm guessing, like me, nobody's got CFOs who are just throwing money at them and saying, please go and spend more for me. So as a result, it's actually how are we looking at that? How are we making sure that we're driving the right model, because is where the benefits will also come from, because the long-term benefits come from the operating model. The tech is an enabler for whatever you're doing from an operating model perspective. So don't lose sight of that when looking at the tech. So just quickly in terms of what we have been doing then and how that all sort of links together. I joined in January 21, and we were really kind of full open heart surgery. I was given pretty much a clean sheet of paper to say what is procurement within the organization. And so we've been through operating model changes that has doubled the size of the organization, because we've taken on lots of new areas. We've taken on all of supplier management, we've taken on all of risk management within to the procurement function, and then looked at how do we streamline and make that operating model more efficient. I'll go on to in a slide in a second, processes and systems, but pretty much every piece of tech that we touch is changing. So it's either implemented already or going through a new evolution, or will be implemented in the next 3 months. And then obviously people. So as part of that new operating model, we've looked at capability enhancement. So we've evolved some of the skills that we have. We've brought a lot of new people into the organization. And now really we're in that moving from transform to sustain. We actually had our first face-to-face offsite 2 weeks ago, where we had 100-ish people together, and it's kind of now looking about how do we then get a really sustainable for the future operating model and end-to-end solution. So in terms of how we've done that from an op model perspective, and then I'll go on to the tech, really we've looked at all of the different touch points we have, all of the different capabilities we were looking for, and broadly speaking, you can put them into these capability groups. So I personally am not a fan of trying to create these superhuman category managers who do everything, because I don't, think they exist, and in current talent market, even more challenging to find. And also, coming back to my point on headspace, I think you don't create the headspace for people to do all of their roles effectively, so it ends up being a side of the desk at Friday at 4:30. And so we've very much divided the team up into the capability groups around category management, sourcing, the procurement proposition really on data and analytics. But I think the key thing is really on the structure of the team is probably more than 40% are either supplier collaboration, digital, or risk. So it's kind of moving away from the core focus being on category management, and that was based on where we were from a business. The financial services sector is obviously going through huge change, caused through disruptors, through the fintechs coming into the market, secondly through a lot of regulatory change, and I think thirdly, COVID accelerated a lot of that as well. So we've been going through a huge evolution, and what the business is or was 5 years ago is very different to what the business will be in 5 years' time. And so how do we support that? And supplier collaboration, partnerships, and then being able to evolve those was a critical element. And so from a tech perspective, and as I said, there are a number of different providers you can see along the bottom. We've really looked at all those different areas, and some of it were solutions we already had in the business, some of them are new solutions we're putting in, but looking at each of the areas where I showed in terms of capability groups, but looking at risk in terms of what is that technology framework. Clearly in the regulated industry like financial services, risk is a huge element of what we do, and probably is the single, well not probably, is the single biggest thing that I talk to Exco and board about, even though we've got some huge cost targets that have all been in the public domain. The key thing that we talk about the most is risk. Supplier performance, linking that into the collaboration and innovation. We've got a very, because of the transformation program we've been under, we've got a very clear governance around benefits delivery about how that all fits together. And so all of that really, even though there are a number of different providers you can see along the bottom, it's really about how do we fit all that together. So from a user perspective, it starts to feel like a seamless activity and everything has its purpose. And taking the 35% to 30%, are we there yet? No. I mean, and absolutely, if I had people in my business sat in here, that would be some of the feedback. But we're learning from some of those, the implementations we've had. We're going through further iterations and looking about how do we evolve it, hence things like the workshop today, hence some of the implementations we have in the coming months. So just finally in summary then, so I think real conclusions for me were, you'll see that we haven't once talked about the technology at all. I mean, I think it's in our jobs, we will often get the business coming to us and saying, this supplier is terrible. And actually, I think more often than not, you need to look in a mirror, because actually it's amazing over my whole career how many suppliers have been great in year one and have been terrible in year 4. And there seems to be a common theme, and normally it's you find the answer through looking in the mirror. So it's really looking at how do we then do that. And so I think taking that step back and having the strong foundation, I'm not necessarily going to say I'm a huge advocate of either fully integrated providers or best of breed, but I think there's a happy balance that you have to have a foundation there. It's then how do you start to build and extend. It's much easier to build and extend as opposed to trying to cover everything all in one go. I think the relevancy point that I talked about, you've got to listen to the business and actually make sure they're relevant. As I said, the biggest criticism I think I could ever receive is that you're irrelevant. It would it would hit me quite hard. So I would much rather fail and then understand why we failed than be irrelevant. Understanding the art of the possible, so I think taking that point on thinking big, the relevancy comes with the fact that you are making an impact and you are delivering something that really solves use cases and solves real business problems. If it's just a procurement tool for procurement, nobody's going to care. Bringing the right talent in. So I think, again, it's like I talked about, it's about growing your internal talent, but growing your internal talent by telling them they've got another 30% increase in workload and they're going to have to do that on top of everything else they do isn't necessarily the best way to develop them. So how do you introduce new talent, let them learn from that talent you bring in, and then end up with a sort of multifunctional, balanced view? Try and simplify as much as you can on the complex activities. As I said, we all operate in quite complex environments now, and you can get lost in the detail. So by trying to take the step back and think holistically and simplifying those complex activities, I think you can make some real quick inroads. Check the engine. So we talked about the operating model. So what is that operating model that's going to support? Because, as I said, all tech should be there for is to enable your business and enable the operating model that you're designing. So make sure that that's fit for purpose and that you're putting as much time and effort into that as you are into the shiny new toy. And then really it's about coming back to that storytelling. I think I didn't really touch on it here, but I think timing is a critical thing as well, and being able to pick your moment where you have real world business problems, and that will be, I mean, we've all got different challenges at the moment, and that will bring different solutions with it. How do you, I think the art of my job really is to identify what those solutions are, identify opportunities, and how do we start to marry the two together, which is why we were really big on the supplier collaboration piece and about how do we start to really bring that innovation in from the supply base. And then that's it. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Nick. Another great session. Unfortunately, as you said, timing is critical, and we've actually gone over time.
Sorry.
So we can't take any questions, I'm afraid, but thank you. People have sent questions in. If you want to engage with Nick, please just do reach out to him directly. Well, please, again, just show your appreciation for Nick Jenkinson. Thank you, Nick.